Most people see a Hell's Angel on the side of the highway and cross to the other lane. They see the patches, the leather, the beard streaked with road dust, and they decide that's somebody else's problem. But on a cold October night along Highway 89 in Montana, when Marcus Reaper Holland pulled his Harley onto the gravel shoulder and cut the engine beside a broken-down sedan with its hazards blinking weakly into the dark, he wasn't thinking about what people saw. He was thinking about the woman inside that car, hunched over the steering wheel, her shoulders shaking with sobs so deep they seemed to come from somewhere beyond grief. What he found when he tapped on her window would unravel a secret powerful people had buried for 23 years. And before the sun rose again, the most feared biker in 3 counties would become the only person standing between a desperate mother and the truth she'd been searching for since the day her son disappeared. 12 hours earlier, Marcus had been sitting in a diner outside Billings, waiting for his coffee to cool and watching the highway through Rain Street glass. He was a big man, 6'4" and broad through the chest, with a gray beard that hung to his collarbone and hands scarred from decades of engines, bar fights, and choices he didn't talk about anymore. The Hells Angels patch on his back told people everything they thought they needed to know, and Marcus had long ago stopped trying to correct them. He'd been riding solo for 3 days, heading north toward the Canadian border for a memorial run honoring a brother who'd gone down on a wet curve the month before. The club would gather at dawn in a town called Shelter Bay, and Marcus planned to arrive early, park his bike, and sit quietly with the memory of a man who'd saved his life in a Reno alley 15 years ago. But the rain had turned heavy by mid-afternoon, and Marcus pulled into a truck stop to wait it out, nursing black coffee and ignoring the nervous glances from a family in the next booth. The father kept looking over, then whispering to his wife, and Marcus could read the concern in their faces as clear as road signs. He sighed, paid his tab, and walked out into the drizzle without making eye contact. By the time he hit Highway 89, the rain had stopped, but the temperature had dropped hard. The asphalt gleamed wet under his headlight, and the mountains rose black against the sky. He'd been riding for maybe an hour when he saw the sedan on the shoulder, hazards flashing in the dark. Marcus slowed instinctively. A lot of riders wouldn't have. The unwritten rule was you helped other bikers, not civilians, especially not alone on a deserted highway at night. But something about the way the car sat there, tilted slightly on a flat tire, made him ease off the throttle and pull over. He kicked the stand down and walked toward the driver's side window. Inside, a woman sat with her forehead pressed against the steering wheel. She was maybe 50, with short graying hair and a wool coat pulled tight around her shoulders. Her hands gripped the wheel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Marcus tapped gently on the glass. She jumped, her head snapping up, eyes red and swollen. For a second, she just stared at him through the window. This massive bearded biker in a Hells Angels vest, and Marcus saw the fear flash across her face. He stepped back, raised both hands slowly, and spoke loud enough to be heard through the glass. "Ma'am, I'm not here to bother you. Just saw you were stuck. You need help with that tire?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Not fear anymore. Something deeper. Something broken. Then she rolled the window down an inch. "I don't need help with the tire," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. "I need help finding my son." Marcus blinked. "Your son?" She nodded, tears spilling over again. "He's been missing for 23 years. The police won't listen. Nobody will listen." She looked up at him with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. "But you're going north, aren't you? Toward Shelter Bay." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "Yeah. How do you know?" The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her hands were shaking as she held it up to the window. It was a photograph, old and creased, of a little boy with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. "Because," she whispered, "that's where they took him." Marcus stared at the photograph for a long moment, the wind pulling at his leather vest while the woman's eyes stayed locked on his face, waiting for him to laugh or walk away or tell her she was crazy. But he didn't do any of those things. He just looked at the picture of the boy, maybe 6 years old, holding a toy truck, and then back at her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I think you better tell me what happened." She nodded and pushed the door open. Marcus stepped back as she climbed out, steadying herself against the car. Up close, he could see how exhausted she was, how the grief had carved lines into her face that hadn't been there in the photograph she was holding. "My name is Carol Dennison," she said. "That's my son, Jamie. He disappeared from a campground near Shelter Bay in October of 2001. He was 6 years old." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And the police?" "They searched for 3 weeks. Then they said he probably drowned in the lake. They never found a body." Her voice cracked. "But I know he didn't drown. I know because 2 days before he disappeared, a man came to our campsite asking questions. He said he was a park ranger, but something about him didn't feel right. And when Jamie vanished, that man was gone, too." Marcus folded his arms. "You tell the cops about him?" "Of course I did. They said they'd look into it. But every time I called, they told me there was no evidence. No leads. Eventually, they stopped returning my calls." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've spent 23 years searching. I've called every tip line, every agency. I've driven to Shelter Bay a dozen times, asking questions, showing his picture. Nobody remembers anything. Nobody cares. And now," Marcus asked quietly. Carol pulled out her phone and opened an email. "3 days ago, I got this." She handed him the phone. The message was short, sent from an anonymous account. "If you want to know what happened to your son, go to Shelter Bay. Ask about the Riverside Youth Home. They'll tell you it closed in 2005. Ask why." Marcus read it twice, then looked up. "You think this is real?" "I don't know," Carol said. "But it's the first lead I've had in years. So I got in my car and started driving." She gestured toward the flat tire. "And then this happened. I've been sitting here for 2 hours trying to figure out what to do. And then you stopped." Marcus handed the phone back. His instincts told him this could be a setup, a scam, or just the cruel hoax of someone who got off on tormenting grieving mothers. But the look in her eyes wasn't desperation. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that came from spending 2 decades refusing to let go. "You got a spare?" he asked. She nodded toward the truck. Marcus walked around the car, popped it open, and pulled out the jack and the spare tire. He worked quickly, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd changed 100 flats on 100 dark roads. Carol stood nearby, hugging herself against the cold. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Marcus didn't look up. "Because somebody should have helped you a long time ago." When the tire was changed, Marcus stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "I'm heading to Shelter Bay tonight. You want to follow me? I'll make sure you get there safe." Carol's eyes filled with tears again. "You don't have to. I know I don't," Marcus said. "But if somebody sent you that email, there's a reason. And if there's even a chance your boy's story didn't end the way they said it did, then you deserve to know the truth." She nodded, unable to speak. They drove in convoy through the night, Marcus's headlight cutting through the dark ahead of her sedan. The mountains rose on either side of the highway, black and silent, and the miles disappeared beneath them until the lights of Shelter Bay finally appeared in the distance, scattered and dim along the edge of a vast lake. Marcus pulled into a motel parking lot just after midnight. Carol parked beside him and got out, looking toward the dark water beyond the town. "The Riverside Youth Home," Marcus said, leaning against his bike. "You know where it was?" "On the north edge of town," Carol said. "It was a group home for kids in state custody. But when I came here 10 years ago, the building was abandoned. Boarded up." Marcus pulled out his phone and did a quick search. The results were thin. A few old news articles about the home closing due to funding issues. Nothing suspicious. Nothing useful. "We'll start there in the morning," he said. "Get some sleep." But neither of them slept much. And when the sun rose pale and cold over Shelter Bay, Marcus stood outside his motel room, staring at the lake and thinking about the boy in the photograph. Because something about this town felt wrong. The kind of wrong that settled in your bones and didn't let go. The Riverside Youth Home sat at the end of a gravel road overgrown with weeds, a 2-story building with boarded windows and a sagging porch that looked like it hadn't seen a visitor in years. Marcus parked his bike in front, and Carol pulled up beside him, her face pale in the morning light. They stood together, staring at the building. "This is it," Carol whispered. Marcus walked toward the front door, his boots crunching on broken glass. The boards across the entrance had been pried loose recently. He could see fresh scratches in the wood. Someone had been here. He pulled the boards aside and stepped into the dim interior. The air smelled of mold and rot. Trash littered the floor. Graffiti covered the walls. But as Marcus moved deeper into the building, he noticed something that made him stop cold. A hallway branching off to the left. and at the end of it, a metal door with a heavy padlock. "Carol," he called. She hurried over, and together they stared at the lock. It was new, rust-free. Marcus pulled a tire iron from his belt and smashed the lock with one hard swing. The metal clattered to the floor. He pushed the door open. Inside was a small office. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Papers were stacked on a desk, and pinned to a corkboard above the desk were photographs. Dozens of them. Children's faces. Names written beneath. Carol gasped and stepped forward. Her hand went to her mouth. "Jamie," she whispered. There, among the faces, was her son, 6 years old, smiling. Marcus moved to the filing cabinets and pulled open the top drawer. Inside were files, hundreds of them, each one labeled with a child's name, a date, and a destination. He pulled one out and read quickly. His stomach turned. The Riverside Youth Home hadn't closed because of funding. It had closed because someone had blown the whistle on an illegal adoption ring. Kids in state custody were being sold to wealthy buyers across the country, their identities erased, their records falsified. The operation had run for over a decade before it was quietly shut down. But the people responsible had never been charged. The files had been sealed. The victims had disappeared into new lives, and the truth had been buried. "Carol," Marcus said quietly. "Come here." She crossed the room, and he handed her a file. Jamie Dennison, age 6, placed with a family in Oregon under a new name. Carol's hands shook as she read. Tears streamed down her face. "He's alive." "According to this, yeah," Marcus said. They changed his name to Ryan Caldwell, placed him with a couple in Portland. Carol sank into a chair, sobbing. "He's alive. Oh God, he's alive." Marcus pulled out his phone and took pictures of everything. The files, the photographs, the names. Then he called the one person he knew who could move faster than the law. A journalist named Sarah Voss who'd exposed corruption stories from Chicago to Seattle. "Sarah," he said when she answered, "I've got something big, and I need you in Shelter Bay by tonight." By the time the sun set, Sarah had arrived with a camera crew. The story broke within hours. Federal agents descended on Shelter Bay. The files were seized. Names were released. And across the country, families who thought their children were dead received phone calls that would change their lives forever. Carol stood outside the motel 3 days later, clutching her phone. Marcus leaned against his bike nearby, waiting. Finally, her phone rang. She answered, and her face crumpled. "Jamie," she whispered. Marcus watched as she listened, tears streaming. When she hung up, she looked at him with a smile, so bright it hurt to see. "He remembers me," she said. "He's been looking for me, too." 2 weeks later, Marcus stood outside a coffee shop in Portland and watched through the window as Carol Dennison met her son for the first time in 23 years. The man who walked through that door was 30 years old now, tall and blonde. But he had the same gap-toothed smile from the photograph. And when he saw his mother, he stopped, and his face broke, and they fell into each other's arms and held on like they'd never let go again. Marcus turned away, climbed onto his bike, and rode north without looking back. Because some stories didn't need an ending. They just needed a beginning. And for Carol and Jamie Dennison, that beginning had finally come.